And welcome back to Interstellar Quest, a series in which we try to go interstellar in Kerbal Space Program. We're using career mode, so we need a ton of science to get there. We have arrived at episode number 4, and it kicks off with the launch of Sagan A1, named of course after Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, but most of all, fiction writer. I remember reading books from him a long time ago when I was a kid. And you've seen this rocket in the previous episode. This is the Vulcan, capable of launching 5 tons to low Kerbal orbit, but it can push lighter payloads all the way to the moon and have delta V to spare. So its payload today is Sagan 1, and it's our first attempt at a lunar lander. And for this first part of the series, we are going to use pretty much the same architecture as the Chinese are using for their lunar program. And it had been considered back in the 60s for the Apollo program as well, but too risky was the judgment back in the day. So we're launching 2 vehicles, and of course we have the Diet spacecraft, but we don't have a suitable lander yet, and that is what today is going to change. This first attempt at a lander is a very simple, non-reusable design. It consists of an upper stage, much similar like the LEM did in the Apollo program. But to fund the mission, we bring additional payloads. So we have a scanner on board, which is scanning the biomes for ore and other materials. And you can see we've put it in a nice polar orbit so we can scan the entire surface in time. We also brought a new communication satellite, which needs to go in a slightly different orbit. So we made some minor adjustments with the abundant fuel that we have in our transfer stage. And then we knock off our small satellite, which is a relay satellite. And then we get to the brunt of the mission, which is the actual part, which is the testing of the lander. And we're testing the landing gear, we're testing the descent engine. And the descent engine is actually also the ascent engine. So it will use the same fuel. It has some additional fuel tanks and mostly science part in this storage container that is on the lower part of the craft. And the exhaust is fed through a funnel through the center part, as you will see in somewhere later in this episode. We're doing the landing burn, and again, much like with the Wayfinders, I've either started too slow or miscalculated. So it's time for Sagan B2. I could also already see that I had burned through the majority of my propellant during the descent. So changes were necessary. We saved off a lot of weight, and we also made sure that we don't pull fuel from the main tanks as we descend to avoid the craft's center of mass to shift. We like it a little bit top heavy. The second launch is again on a Vulcan, exactly the same profile. Get to orbit and use this massive second stage to get there. But you can see that we have a new satellite on top. And this is a different contract that we're going to do, but we're going to run a similar profile. So we have multiple missions paying for our lunar exploration, which is good because this is expensive stuff to figure out. And this particular satellite is an altimetry satellite. It's from the Scansat pack, and it will bring us insight on the altitude of ridges on the moon and craters. But most of all, it has these nice red lines on the map that shows us where there are steep angles on the moon. So ridges, crater rims, stuff you don't want to land on. And so we deploy this additional satellite. You can see it's scanning. It will take some time to get the moon completely scanned, but that's no problem for us. We've got more than enough time. I think we had about 50 meters of delta V left in the transfer stage. So let's see if this lander can land on its own and get back into orbit, which would be unfortunate if you only can land on the moon and not get back. So we have to test both things. We're in the final descent stage, and we're capturing some science on the way down. I had some difficulties with persistent thrust. So if persistent thrust is on, this is where you can see the funnel, which I was talking about earlier. So persistent thrust allows you to warp under or accelerate under time warp. But it also means that once your tanks are empty, you get these really weird messages. I adjusted the landing burn at the last moment to avoid falling into this crater because of the rims. And we're trying to get close to the rim of the crater because it will, well, hopefully give us some really nice views. But there we have it. Parallax added tons of stone, so maybe we should send the Wayfinder ahead of us to find a way and find a place with less large boulders, because automated landings are hard. Second stage kicks off after a couple of hours and tries to get back into orbit. We do this basically by bumping up in the air a small amount, then pointing about 5 to 10 degrees above the horizon and burn like hell. So we don't have a gravity turn like you have on Kerbal, just go there. When you reach 7 kilometers, circularize, which is what we're going to do in a moment. And we managed to do this with the onboard fuel. In the initial runs with the Sagan A, I always had to resort to abusing my monopropellant to get into orbit, but this is fine. It's got a couple of meters per second left. Not that much, but more than enough. Once you're in lunar orbit, the rest is kind of easy. And you can use the monopropellant, which this capsule needs to actually make the rendezvous with the orbiting spacecraft. But that's something for a second part of the mission. For now, we're cleaning up our debris. You can see we had a bit of liquid fuel left, and we're using the monopropellant to lower our orbit and crash this probe into the lunar surface, which was one of the contracts. And this is one of the ways how you can progress faster through KSP. Meanwhile, the Wayfinder B2 is of course still in Oman and made its way to a new biome. And so it has this addition, it has 2 goo containers on board and is able to get science data from, well, at least 2 biomes. And of course the resettable instruments like the thermometer and the barometer, all that stuff can be reused in different biomes, but it takes significant real world time to travel and drive all the way to a new biome, and parallax is not helping with all these boulders, which I guess is a great realism interpretation of what the man would really look like. But as you can see, we can drive pretty fast. I go up to 8 meters per second, but I love these nice empty patches of land. And here you can see me transmit the data. We're going to run out of power in a moment, and then once the sun is high enough, it will return. It is time for the main part of this movie. Sagan B3. After the successful test run, we're launching the B3 version. And you can see we're using the secondary launch pad on the side of the launch facilities. I've used Kerbal contracts. You can see already new runways popping up and factories and signs. The storyline is once our program gets more and more successful, you're going to get more funding and more activity around the spaceport. So it makes sense for me to have more buildings there as time progresses. The Sagan B3, identical to the B2, is making its way to orbit in exactly the way as the first one did. But we're not going to follow her all the way through to the moon. And that has a specific reason. This is also why we had a second launch pad in action. Now, when you would use Kerbal construction time, which I may actually resort to, you could actually use the pads simultaneously, but for some reason that does not work with Kerbal constructs only. So we use the secondary launch pad because we need the primary launch pad for our next mission, which is the Diet B, but this time the 3M variant. And the M variant basically means Munar. So it's the variant that we're going to use for the moon, but it is exactly the same spacecraft, but now stacked on a Vulcan rocket. And being only 2 tons, and I think with the M variant something around 2.5 tons, because it carries additional propellant and it carries a docking port construct, which I will show you in a moment once the fairing is gone. And inside the fairing and inside the spacecraft are 2 of our kerbals. On board we have Valentina Kerben, the first woman to orbit the planet, and Bob Kerben, who has returned from his long duration stay at the Kerbal Space Station, where he did all this material science. So both of them are very experienced. Here we can see Bob slightly scared by all the readouts, and Valentina having the time of her life, but maybe slightly annoyed because of the fairing. Here we go. You can see the additional payload we've added. So there's a docking port and an airlock module, which allows people to go outside without depressurizing the whole capsule. But we'll get to that. Meanwhile, our second spacecraft has arrived at the moon and is making final orbit adjustments. This time there's no additional payload or additional mission. This mission will pay for itself. And the main reason for that is that I don't want any risk on this mission. I don't want to lose kerbals on this. So what I've opted to do is to make sure that we have more than enough fuel. Here we go. The diet has caught up with them. Well, at least caught up. Also arrived at lunar orbit. I think there was a day behind at the end. It took a longer route. But the rendezvous was really, really easy. And here you can see me transmitting the data, making sure we have everything stored in one place. Setting the target to the port of the Sagan. And then pushing ourselves a little bit closer before we'll have the autodock pilot take it over from us. I also realized that firing these big engines is kind of scary, so after the initial push we did drop the transfer stage, but the diet has more than enough fuel to get back. You only need about 300 meters per second to get back from the moon, and this one has plenty of fuel. You can see me flip the spacecraft around to make the life easier for the lander, who's going to do most of the docking because it has most of the propellant. It had excess monopropellant, so we're going to use that when setting the target. And here we can see the spacecraft come in. Both of them are actually the third series. At the last point I noticed that the docking port should be 180 degrees turn, but here we are. We have a rendezvous in orbit of Moon, and the first thing we're going to do is send Bob out because the Sagan spacecraft collected some data during the trip here, and that meant that some of the experiments have to be reset, and a scientist can do that. They can restore the experiments, take all that data, and then we can reuse those experiments or reuse those experiments indefinitely. So this is why having a scientist on your mission is super handy. The 2B also has this minor relay antenna. I think this is from Restock, which is a really nice thing to do. And you can see him leaving the main craft but getting in through the airlock. And Valentina has graciously agreed to give us a small tour of the ship. So she has this double airlock which allows her to go into the tunnel, the docking port, and this is where we have access to both the lander, where we can go to, though that edge is not supporting free IVA, and we also have an airlock where we can go outside, which is pretty cool. Also a bit wasteful to dump it into the atmosphere later on, but well, I guess the kerbals don't care too much about that. We are separating the main spacecraft, so both the astronauts have moved into the lander module, and the little red line, unfortunately, this is something I use from MacJeb to get insight on where the intended landing target is, and I guess a landing computer is something they would have in this kind of spacecraft. So we're burning the remainder of fuel from the descent stage, which was really a lot. Then decouple and use the descent engine on the lander, which is what the Soviets planned to do with their lunar lander. So we have so much reserves that we could almost get back into orbit with just the descent stage, as you will see later on. But I miscalculated and we end up in the rim of the crater, and you can see me, not panicking, but kicking in, taking over from the autolander and blowing us back up. We're going for a manual landing attempt here. I'm going to push us a little bit over the rim and make sure we land on a safe place, which is right about now. We're in the final descent stage, and Valentina is putting the craft down in the first free spot she can find. Took a bit of fiddling to actually get there, but I didn't want to land on one of those big boulders and tip over. And here we go. First touchdown on the moon in our playthrough. And I promise you there are going to be plenty more. In the left upper right corner you can see all the science being transversed. But it's up to Bob. He is going to be the first to step on the moon and say some profound words of wisdom. Like, Valentina, where are you? Who then promptly falls and becomes the first kerbal to trip on the moon. Which I guess is also something. She has the honor of planting the interstellar flag and walking around and leaving all these footprints on the moon. Taking science samples and digging up EVA reports. Meanwhile, we have Bob. Bob is there to run all those experiments, remember? So he can reset the containers that were used, or experiments that were used during the final descent phases, which gave us some science data from close to the moon, but now we can get the science data from on the moon. And he also grabs the experiment pack that we brought along. And I'm trying to figure out how this works. I'm used to KISS. This is the new stock inventory system, which is pretty cool. And he's going to do an expensive and scientific experiment and becomes the person to hit a golf ball on the moon, the furthest has ever been done. I think this was actually done on Apollo 12. I think it was 12 or 14 where they brought a golf club and actually did that. They had all kinds of fun things. Some point the astronauts were doing like the lunar Olympics with high jumps, and then only stopped to when they realized they would do exactly what Valentina did right now in this fall and probably tear up your suit on the kind of sharp edges of the regolith. But in Kerbal Space Program, things are easier. You can just use your jetpack to fly on the moon. Not forever. You only have 5 units of monopropellant. And in stock game you can't refill them, but I think we can. I haven't really figured that out yet. But she's flying over to the ridge of this crater. You remember where we just last minute effort ditched away and pushed into orbit. But yeah, she's going for the crater, but she's doing things very carefully. She doesn't want to fall over the edge. Puts away her mobile maneuvering unit, or MMU, and then walks up to the ridge to admire not only the Earthrise in the back, but also this immense hole that some kind of an asteroid made, which makes you feel quite small. Yeah, maybe put your visor down if you're staring directly into the sun. Meanwhile, we're trying to deploy our surface science, and I'm not sure what I did wrong, but I'm unable to deploy it directly from the container. I'm also struggling to put stuff in the inventory of the kerbals themselves. So if you know how to deploy surface science modules, do tell me in the comments, because I didn't see how to do this, and we brought all this stuff to set up a small science post or right there on the moon and get some additional science. But yeah, alas, we did not get anything done here. You can see me move stuff around, making sure we get the parachute and the backpack back into our personal inventory to make sure that if we have to exit for whatever reason in space, we do it properly. And if we have to do it in the atmosphere, we also can do it properly. We're checking all the systems for takeoff. And we have a flawless takeoff. Now, this particular capsule does not have a reaction wheel. I added one to the descent stage, but the ascent stage does not have a reaction wheel, which means you have to use RCS like real-life spacecraft or like spacecraft in real solar system to get your orientation right. It's not a big problem once you're used to it. In the beginning, it's kind of finicky when you're used to Kerbal Space Program in the stock variant, but once you're actually used to it, it's not that hard. It's just yet another resource to keep track of. They're making their insertion burn in orbit and admiring the landscape, maybe doing some photo reconnaissance to navigate better by mapping out craters. And from there, it's a 5 meters per second increase in orbit, and they have a rendezvous. You can see the spacecraft in addition, and setting up the proper docking port and getting the thing into alignment. Here we go. Gotta love the plumes. I think that's waterfall that makes these plumes, but it's also how the system is configured. So this is a stock craft, so waterfall probably comes with that configuration. But for most mods, you would need specific configurations to actually make that happen. They are back in orbit, they are reconnected, and they are now working on transferring all the data and getting rid of the debris. In this case, that would mean the ascent capsule. And they're setting a course for Kerbin. Leaving orbit from the moon takes about 300 meters per second. They try to fire up the engines to notice that one of them is not firing. And this had something to do that during the ascent of the when we left Kerbin, by accident both engines switched on and I quickly switched them off. But now for the staging, only one of them works. And the craft is powerful enough to maneuver. It just introduces a spin and it's slightly less efficient, but hey, we have more than enough delta V to get back home. I did make a mistake with setting the periapsis pretty low, something like 30 kilometers or even lower, rather than the 50 that I would normally do, which means that the heating on the craft is pretty much, and in a moment we'll see that the support packages and the service module will blow up, but the craft stays in one piece, but barely. We're very close to exploding, so we either need a better craft or better piloting perhaps. Regardless, Valentina made us all proud by navigating us right into a cornfield very close to the Kerbal Space Center, I believe. Here we are, safely back home. And we are bringing home a treasure trove of science. And we're going to need that. This is, here we go. Well, not that close to the KSP. Both of them are safely back. You can see already the expansions have begun. And we'll take one short look at the tech tree to see how far we have progressed. And maybe next time I'll take you on a tour of the base.